Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. There are stories the water swallows whole. They begin on quiet mornings, small boats, grey skies that never quite clear. And they end with missing evidence, dead men, and witnesses who change their stories in ways that don't feel like relief. But every now and then, something refuses to sink. A knock at the door. A moment that doesn't belong. Someone who already knows. This is one of those stories. This is Maury Island. Chapter 1. The World Before the Saucers. June 1947. The war is officially over. But if you've ever tried to relax after something big, you'll know it doesn't just switch off. It lingers, inhabits in silence, in the way people look at the sky a little longer than they used to. 2 years earlier, the world learned it could split the atom, which is not the kind of thing you just casually process and move on from. One day you're worried about rationing sugar. The next day you're wondering if the sky itself has become negotiable. People didn't talk about it like that, not openly, but it was there, underneath everything. The newspapers were optimistic. Rebuilding, industry, progress, all the good words. But there was also this quiet awareness that something had changed permanently. Not just technology, perspective. The sky used to be background. Now it felt involved. And this is the world Harold Dahl wakes up in. Not a world of mystery, not yet. A world of routine, of work, of small responsibilities that make life feel stable again. Harbour patrol, a job that involves boats, water, and making sure nothing drifts where it shouldn't. Which, when you think about it, is quite a comforting idea. That things stay where they're supposed to be. That the world behaves. That if something appears in the wrong place, you notice it, you deal with it, and then everything goes back to normal. That's the assumption, and it's a good one, right up until the moment it isn't. Because in just a few days, something is going to appear in the sky above Puget Sound that does not follow any of those rules. And before we get there, you need to understand the water. Chapter 2. The Sound. Puget Sound is a stretch of water in Washington state. Cold, quiet, and not loud. It doesn't announce itself, it just exists. Cold, grey-green water, stretching between quiet islands, with a sky that never quite commits to being clear. Even on a good day, there's a softness to everything. Edges blur. Distances feel uncertain. You look out across the water, and you're never entirely sure where it ends. It's the kind of place that makes you slow down without asking permission. The air smells like salt and pine and something mechanical. Diesel, maybe. Boats move through it steadily, not rushing because there's no reason to rush here. The water doesn't like that kind of energy. And then there are the islands. They sit low and quiet, half covered in trees, like they're not especially interested in being noticed. Maury Island is one of them. Small, forested, connected to Vashon Island by a narrow strip of land that feels almost accidental. If you were looking at a map, you might miss it entirely. And yet, if you were there, you wouldn't. There's a stillness to it, not eerie, not dramatic, just patient. Like it's perfectly comfortable keeping its own company. The kind of place where something could happen, and the environment wouldn't react. No sudden music, no dramatic shift. Just the same water, the same sky, the same slow movement of air, carrying on as if nothing has changed. Which, if you think about it, is slightly unsettling. Because if something did happen here, who would even notice? Well, on the 21st of June, 1947, someone did, and his name was Harold Dahl. Chapter 3. A Man Named Harold. Harold Dahl is not the kind of man you build stories around, which is exactly why this works. He's a harbour patrol officer, not a scientist, not a pilot, not someone looking up at the sky, wondering what else might be out there. He's looking down at the water, at logs drifting too close to shipping lanes, at the kind of problems that can be solved with a rope, a bit of patience, and maybe a cup of coffee afterwards. He has a routine, and people like Harold tend to trust their routines, not in a dramatic way, just quietly. The same way you trust that your front door will still be where you left it when you get home. He has a son, Charles, a teenager, old enough to help, young enough to still find it a bit exciting to be out on the water early in the morning. There's also a dog, because, of course there is. Boats and dogs just make sense together. It's a normal setup. A father, a son, a dog, and a job that involves moving slowly through a quiet stretch of water, making sure everything is where it should be. No mystery, no expectation of anything unusual. And that's important, because when people tell stories like this, there's always a temptation to make the person at the center feel chosen, like they were somehow meant to experience what happened. But Harold doesn't feel like that. If anything, he feels like the kind of person this should not happen to, which makes what happens next feel less like discovery and more like interruption. Just a routine patrol, just another morning, just a man doing his job, and then something appears in the sky. Chapter 4, June 21st, 1947. It's just a morning, nothing dramatic about it, no warning, no sense that anything is about to change. Harold is out on the water, doing exactly what he's done dozens of times before. The engine hums in that steady, reassuring way engines do when they're behaving properly. The kind of sound you stop noticing after a while. Water laps gently against the hull. Gulls drift overhead, occasionally complaining about something that probably feels very important to them. If you've ever been out on the water early, you'll know this feeling. Everything is level. Not exciting, not tense, just steady, predictable. The sort of morning where your biggest concern might be whether you remembered to bring enough coffee. And at this point, if you're Harold, that's still the biggest problem you expect to deal with today, which, in hindsight, feels optimistic. Charles is there with him, moving about the boat, helping where he can. The dog is somewhere nearby, doing what dogs do on boats, which is mostly looking proud of themselves for no clear reason. It's quiet, and when things are this quiet, your brain does something interesting. It relaxes. It stops scanning for problems. It assumes the world is behaving exactly as it should, which is why, when something finally does change, it takes a second longer than it should to register. Harold notices it not because it's loud, but because it isn't. There's a shift, not in sound, in absence, the kind of absence that makes you look up without quite knowing why. And when he does, everything stops, because the sky is no longer empty, and what he's looking at does not belong there. Chapter 5, The Six. At first, it doesn't make sense. Not in a dramatic way, more like your brain trying to file something and not finding the right folder. 6 shapes, suspended, perfectly still. They don't move in position, they don't arrive, they're just there, as if someone placed them in the sky and forgot to explain it. Harold cuts the engine. Not because he's told to, not because he's panicking, just instinct. When something doesn't make sense, you get quiet. You stop adding noise to the situation. And now there's nothing, no engine, no wind worth mentioning, no sound coming from the objects themselves, which might be the strangest part, because they are big, large enough that you expect something, a hum, a vibration, a low mechanical presence. Nothing. Just 6 enormous ring-shaped forms hanging over the water like they've always been there. Harold looks at Charles. Charles looks back. And you can almost hear that unspoken exchange. Are you seeing this? Yeah, I'm seeing it. No one says it out loud, because saying it would make it real in a way that feels permanent. Have you ever had that moment where your brain quietly suggests a perfectly reasonable explanation and then just as quietly rejects it? Aircraft? No. Weather? Definitely not. For a second, your mind reaches for anything familiar and finds nothing. And that's the point where curiosity starts to give way to something else. Not fear, not yet. Just the uncomfortable realization that you're looking at something without a category. Now, here's the question, and it's the first one that really matters. If you saw something like this, what would you assume? Something experimental? Maybe. Or something else entirely? And this is where the story tightens, because whatever these things are, they're not just sitting there. One of them is starting to move. Chapter 6, The One That Faltered. It's subtle at first, a slight shift, a change in position that feels almost accidental, like it wasn't supposed to happen. 5 of the objects remain steady, locked in place, as if held there by something precise and controlled. The 6th isn't. It dips, not a clean descent, not controlled, more like a hesitation, a wobble that doesn't belong in something that large. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's wrong. There's a moment here where everything holds, because the other 5 begin to respond. Not dramatically, no sudden movements, no chaos, just adjustment. They shift slightly, closing in, tightening their formation around the one that's drifting. If you didn't know better, you might say they were reacting, which is an odd thought to have about something you don't understand. Harold stands there watching. And this is where instinct starts to clash with reality, because every part of you wants to do something, move, leave, create distance. But there's also that other part, the one that keeps you still, the part that needs to understand what you're seeing before you react to it. And in moments like this, that part usually wins. There's nothing he can do, no action to take, no procedure for this, just observation. And that's when the feeling changes. Up until now, this has been strange. Now it becomes something else. Because the object isn't just moving, it's coming down, slowly, unevenly, drifting in a way that feels less like flight and more like failure. And if you're standing on a boat directly beneath it, that realization lands pretty quickly. Whatever is happening up there is about to happen down here. And this is where the real question begins. Not what they are, but what happens next. Chapter 7. Fire and Falling Stone. At first, it doesn't look dangerous, just fragments. Thin, dark pieces drifting down from the damaged object above. They move slowly, almost gently, like burnt paper caught in a lazy breeze. For a second, you might even think that's not so bad. Then the second wave comes in, and that illusion disappears. The heavier material doesn't drift, it falls. Dense, irregular chunks, dark, metallic, still warm, maybe hotter than that. They hit the water with dull, heavy impacts, not splashes, more like something forcing its way into a surface that doesn't want it there. One strikes the boat, not hard enough to destroy it, but hard enough to be real. Another hits the deck. Charles cries out, not dramatic, just sharp, instinctive. He grabs his arm. Dad. Not loud, not panicked, just confused. Like he hasn't quite caught up to what's happened yet. And that might be the worst part, because pain usually comes with context. This doesn't. Burned. Harold moves fast now. Finally, something to do. Something that makes sense. Get the boat moving. Get out from under it. But the dog doesn't move fast enough. And there's a moment, a very quiet moment, where everything slows again. Because this isn't chaos, it's controlled damage. Like something above is shedding weight it no longer wants, and everything below is just where it happens to land. Harold turns the boat, engine roaring now, breaking the silence that had settled earlier. The sky above still occupied, the one object still struggling. And you can feel it. This is no longer just strange, this is an event. Something has gone wrong up there, and whatever it is, it's falling apart directly over them. Chapter 8. The Shore. By the time they reach the shoreline, it's over. The sky is empty. No movement, no sound, no sign that anything was ever there. If you arrive 5 minutes later, you'd see nothing unusual at all. Just water, trees, a quiet stretch of land doing exactly what it always does. But the beach tells a different story. Pieces are scattered across it, dark, jagged, some of them still giving off a faint heat. Not glowing, not dramatic, just wrong for something that should have been sitting in the sky moments ago. Harold steps out, checks his son again. The burn is real, angry but not catastrophic. Still, enough to make this impossible to ignore, enough to make this physical. The dog is still. And that changes the tone more than anything else, because now there's no pretending. This happened, and the water doesn't react, it just holds it. Whatever it was, it reached down from the sky and left something behind. Harold starts taking photographs. You can imagine him hesitating for a second, wondering if this is even worth documenting, then doing it anyway. Because instinct says you're going to need proof. And maybe, somewhere in the back of his mind, there's already a thought forming. Not fully shaped yet, just a feeling that whatever this is, it's not going to be easy to explain later. And here's the strange part. At this moment, everything feels solvable. There's debris, there's injury, there are witnesses. This is the kind of thing you report, the kind of thing someone explains, right? But before any explanation arrives, Harold decides to tell someone he trusts. And that's when the story shifts again. Chapter 9. Fred Crisman. Fred Crisman doesn't react the way you might expect. There's no disbelief, no laughter, no immediate dismissal. He listens carefully, too carefully, maybe. Harold explains what he saw, the shapes, the falling material, the damage, the burn, the dog, all of it. And Crisman doesn't interrupt, doesn't challenge, doesn't even seem particularly surprised. He just takes it in. Now, it's worth knowing, Crisman isn't just another name on a clipboard. He's the kind of man who seems comfortable in situations that don't quite make sense. The kind of man who doesn't rush to conclusions because he doesn't seem particularly surprised by uncertainty. And that doesn't mean anything by itself, but it does change the way you hear his silence. Now, you could read that a few ways. Maybe he trusts Harold. Maybe he's just a calm guy. Or maybe, and this is where things get a little uncomfortable, he's not hearing anything new. Crisman decides to go to the site himself. That alone makes sense. If someone tells you debris fell from the sky, you go and look at the debris. That's just good management. He returns later, confirming that yes, there is material there, but his version of events feels slightly adjusted. Not wildly different, just shaped. Like he's smoothing something out, directing attention in a particular way. And it's subtle enough that you might miss it entirely, but it plants a question. Not a loud one, just a quiet thought that settles in the background. Is everyone here seeing the same thing? Or is the story already starting to change? Because the next part doesn't feel like a natural progression. It feels like something stepping in, and it arrives the very next morning. Chapter 10. The Knock. It's early, too early for visitors. Harold is at home when he hears it, a knock at the door. Not urgent, not aggressive, just precise, measured. He opens it, and there's a man standing there, well-dressed, clean lines, dark suit, dark tie. The kind of person you don't remember clearly 5 minutes after seeing them. Not because there's nothing to notice, but because nothing stands out, which in itself is a little unusual. The man is polite, calm, friendly even, and he knows Harold's name. Now, that's not impossible. Small communities, word travels. You can explain that. But then he knows about the boat, the sun, the exact location on the water. And not in general sense, in detail. The kind of detail that doesn't usually travel overnight. The kind of detail that hasn't been shared yet. At one point, he mentions something small, the position of the boat. Not just where it was, but how it was angled when Harold turned it. A detail so specific, so unnecessary, that it doesn't make sense for anyone else to know it. And that's the moment the conversation shifts. Because now, this isn't just unusual, now it's impossible to place. Harold listens. And you can imagine the internal shift happening in real time. At first, curiosity, then confusion, and then something else. Because the man isn't asking questions, he's confirming things. As if he's already been there. As if he already knows how the story goes. And here's the moment that sticks. The one that doesn't quite fit anywhere. He references the event in a way that suggests not just knowledge, but familiarity. Like this wasn't unexpected. Like it was always going to happen. And he's just following up. The conversation stays calm, controlled, almost routine, which might be the strangest part of all, because nothing about this should feel routine, and yet, the man treats it like it is. Chapter 11. What the Stranger Said. The man doesn't raise his voice, doesn't lean in, doesn't threaten. No dramatic pause, no ominous music cue, nothing like that. If anything, he speaks the way someone might explain how to fix a leaking tap. Calm, certain. Already finished with the conversation before it's even begun. He tells Harold that what he saw was real, which is a strange place to start if you think about it. Because Harold already knows that. His son's arm knows that. The beach knows that. The absence of the dog knows that. So why say it? And then the man continues. He explains gently that it would be better not to discuss it. Not a warning, not even advice really, more like information. The kind of information that doesn't invite debate. You can almost imagine Harold trying to respond, maybe opening his mouth, then closing it again. Because what do you say to someone who already seems to know how this ends? The man doesn't stay long. He finishes his point, stands, leaves. No rush, no hesitation. Just done. And once the door closes, the house feels different. Not unsafe, just rearranged. Like something invisible has been moved slightly out of place. And here's the part that lingers. It's not just what the man said, it's how he said it. Like this wasn't unusual. Like this wasn't even particularly important. Just another thing that happens sometimes. And that leaves Harold with something far worse than fear. A question. Who was that man? And how did he already know? Chapter 12. Silence and its weight. At first, Harold does what he's been told. Nothing. He goes about his day. Keep things small, keep things contained, which sounds easy until you try it. Because silence isn't empty, it fills up. And the strange thing about silence is, it doesn't just hide things, it changes them. Details soften, edges blur. What felt clear in the moment starts to feel negotiable. And once that starts happening, the story isn't just being remembered, it's being reshaped. The burned arm still needs attention. The beach still exists. The memory of those objects in the sky doesn't politely fade away. It just sits there, waiting to be acknowledged. And people notice things. You can't come back from a morning like that and act completely normal. Not convincingly. Something shifts in the way you talk, the way you pause, and the way you look at nothing in particular, just for a little too long. Someone asks a question, then another. And before long, the story begins to move. Quietly at first. Passed from one person to another. A detail here, a version there. Slightly different each time, but carrying the same core. Something happened on the water. Something fell from the sky. And Harold Dahl was there. Now, if this were a simple story, it might have stopped there. Local incident, a few witnesses, maybe a report filed somewhere then forgotten. But this is 1947, and something else is already happening across the country. People are starting to report things in the sky. Lights, shapes, movements that don't quite fit. Which means, when this story reaches the right ears, it doesn't stay small, it travels. And eventually, it lands with someone who has just seen something of his own. Someone who is already asking questions, and more importantly, someone who doesn't easily scare. Chapter 13. The Man Who Saw Saucers. His name is Kenneth Arnold, and just a few days after Maury Island, he's already become a headline. Not because he wanted to, quite the opposite. Arnold is a businessman, a pilot, the kind of person who likes things to make sense. Numbers, distances, speeds, clear inputs, clear outputs. Which is why his own sighting unsettled him so much. 9 objects, moving fast, very fast, near Mount Rainier. He described their motion in a way that would follow him for the rest of his life. Like saucers skipping across water. And just like that, a phrase was born. Flying saucers. Now, Arnold isn't interested in building a legend. He wants answers. So, when the story of Maury Island reaches him, it doesn't feel like entertainment. It feels like data. A second point. Another incident, close in time, close in location, but very different in detail. And there's something else. Debris. That changes everything. Because sightings are one thing. You can argue about sightings all day. Light, distance, angle, imagination. Plenty of room to disagree. But physical material, that's different. That's testable. That's something you can hold, and that matters more than it sounds. Because if even part of this is real, then it's not just happening to Harold, it's something bigger. Something that exists whether anyone understands it or not. And Arnold wants to see it. So he makes a decision. He's going to Tacoma. He's going to meet Harold Dahl. And he's going to find out, as directly as possible, what actually happened. But he won't be the only one asking that question, not for long. Chapter 14. The Hotel Room. Arnold checks into his hotel in Tacoma. Simple enough. A place to sleep, a base of operations, nothing unusual. At least, not at first. Then the phone rings. Now, a phone ringing in a hotel room isn't exactly suspicious. It's the 1940s, not a spy film. People use phones, that's normal. What's not normal is the voice on the other end. Calm, precise, and already informed. The caller knows Arnold is in Tacoma, knows why he's there, knows who he's planning to meet. And here's where it shifts from odd to unsettling. The caller references conversations, private ones, the kind that happen behind closed doors, between people who assume they're not being listened to. Arnold listens, doesn't interrupt, because Just like Harold, he's realizing something in real time. This isn't someone gathering information. This is someone confirming it. And that changes the situation entirely. Arnold is not easily shaken, but this gets his attention. Because now the question isn't about objects in the sky, it's about something else. Something that seems to know where people are, what they're doing, and what they're about to do next. So, Arnold makes a decision. If someone is watching, he's going to bring in people who can look back. He reaches out to 2 Army Air Force intelligence officers, men he trusts, men with authority, men who deal in facts, and within hours, they're on their way. Because whatever this is, it's no longer just a story. It's becoming something else, something official. Chapter 15. Davidson and Brown. They arrive quickly, faster than you might expect for something that, officially, hasn't even been confirmed as real. Captain William Davidson, Captain Frank Brown, Army Air Force Intelligence. Now we're in a different category. Up until now, this has been a story. A strange one, yes, but still something that exists in conversations, phone calls, second-hand accounts. These men deal in verification. They speak with Harold, then with Crisman. They listen, ask questions, examine the details with that particular kind of focus that makes you feel like everything you say is being filed somewhere permanent. No drama, no raised eyebrows, just process. And then they look at the material, the debris, collected, stored, waiting to be understood. You can imagine the moment, one of them turning a piece over in his hands, not reacting much, but thinking, measuring, deciding something internally that no one else is part of. These are not men who get easily shaken. They've seen war. They've seen equipment fail. They've seen things go wrong in ways that don't make headlines. So, if something here unsettles them, it's not because they're inexperienced. It's because something doesn't fit. And then, just as quickly as they arrived, they're ready to leave. Now, that's the part that stands out. Because if you were investigating something like this, you might stay. You might cross-check, interview again, take your time. They don't. They pack the material, load it onto their aircraft, and prepare to go. Arnold suggests that they stay the night. Sensible. It's late. No need to rush. They decline, politely, firmly. They want to return immediately. Which raises a question. What did they see that made them want to leave so quickly? Because whatever it was, it doesn't stay with them for long. Chapter 16. The B-25 does not land. The aircraft lifts off. A B-25. Reliable, proven, not experimental, not fragile. The kind of plane you trust to get you where you're going. For a while, everything is normal. Then, something isn't. Accounts say there was trouble on board. A fire, possibly. Something forcing a sudden decision. The tail gunner bails out. Another passenger does too. Both survive. Davidson and Brown remain. And that detail tends to get lost. These were the first people to treat this as something real. Not a story, not a rumor. Something worth examining properly. And they don't make it back. And the plane goes down, just like that. No long sequence, no drawn-out struggle. One moment in the air, the next not. The official explanation is straightforward. Mechanical failure. One of those things that happens, especially with aircraft that have seen service. Tragic, yes, but not mysterious. At least, not on paper. But here's where it shifts. The debris, the material collected from Maury Island, loaded onto the aircraft before takeoff, handled carefully, treated as evidence. After the crash, it isn't mentioned, not recovered, not listed, not accounted for, just absent. And you don't need to be a conspiracy theorist to notice that. You just need to ask a very simple question. Where did it go? Because now something else has entered the story. Not just an event, not just witnesses, but loss. Loss of people, loss of evidence, and maybe loss of continuity. Because from this point on, the story stops behaving like something that wants to be understood. Chapter 17. The investigation unravels. Arnold stays, which, to be fair, is a bold move at this point. 2 officers are dead. The evidence is gone. There are phone calls coming in from people who seem to know a little too much about his movements. And yet, he doesn't leave immediately. He keeps asking questions, keeps pulling at the thread, and the thread keeps thinning. And the frustrating part is, it never snaps cleanly. You ever try to hold on to something that doesn't want to stay still? That's what this starts to feel like. Every time you think you've got a solid detail, it shifts. Not enough to disappear, just enough to stop being useful. There are reports, rumours, a newspaper article suggesting sabotage. That word appears briefly, like it's testing the water. Sabotage. Then it disappears again. No follow-up, no official statement, no confirmation. Just a suggestion, and then silence. The calls continue, always calm, always controlled. Never dramatic enough to point to directly, but persistent enough to feel intentional. And here's the strange part. Nothing escalates. No confrontation, no clear threat. No moment where someone steps forward and says stop. Instead, things just dissolve. Conversations become harder to pin down. Leads fade. People become less available. Details that once felt solid begin to feel negotiable. And eventually, even Arnold reaches a limit. Not of interest, of traction. There's only so long you can investigate something that keeps slipping out of your hands. So he leaves Tacoma. Not with answers, just with a story that doesn't behave like other stories. And behind him, something closes, quietly. Chapter 18. Harold changes his story. Time passes, not a long time, just enough for things to settle, for attention to shift elsewhere, for the edges of the story to soften. And then Harold Dahl speaks again. This time, it's different. He says it was a hoax, all of it. The objects, the debris, the damage, the entire event, made up. Now, on the surface, that should simplify everything. Case closed, mystery resolved, move on. But that's not how it feels. Because when people admit to making something up, there's usually a release, a kind of loosening, maybe embarrassment, maybe relief, something human. That's not what people report here. What they describe is control. Measured words, careful phrasing, no deviation, no hesitation. Like he's following a script. And not in an obvious way. Not robotic, just precise. Too precise. And the details don't unravel. That's the key. Nothing gets exposed, no contradictions laid out. No moment where the whole thing collapses under its own weight. Instead, the story is simply placed down, gently, as if no longer meant to be carried. And that leaves you with something uncomfortable. Because now you have two versions. One where something happened, and one where nothing did. And neither one fully replaces the other. Which brings us to the real question. Not what Harold said, but why he said it. Chapter 19. What it opened. Maury Island comes first. That's the part people tend to forget. Before Roswell, before headlines, before the language even existed to describe what people thought they were seeing. This happens quietly, on a stretch of water most people couldn't point to on a map. And yet, everything is already there. Something in the sky, something falling. Physical material that can be touched, collected, examined. Then, intervention. Not loud, not official in an obvious way, just present. A man at a door, a voice on a phone. People who seem to know things before they should. And then, just as quietly, silence. And like the water you started with, it doesn't just cover things, it keeps them. If you step back and look at it, not as a single story but as a pattern, it starts to feel familiar. Almost like a template being tested before anyone realized there was a template. Now, to be fair, there are grounded explanations. Some researchers believe it was a hoax, that Dahl and Crisman fabricated the story, possibly using industrial slag as evidence, that the whole thing got out of hand, attracted attention, and was eventually walked back. That's a reasonable interpretation. Others suggest something more complex, a mix of truth and exaggeration, a real event, misinterpreted or reshaped over time. Also reasonable. And then there's a version that doesn't quite settle into either category. The one where something did happen, something unusual enough to draw attention quickly. And that attention didn't look like curiosity. It looked like management. Now, here's the question. Not what happened on Maury Island. We've been asking that the whole time. The deeper question is this. Why does the story behave the way it does? Why does it move then stop, appear then flatten? Why do the details feel solid until they don't? Because whatever your conclusion is, one thing is difficult to ignore. This story doesn't end. it gets contained. And once you notice that, you start to wonder how many other stories follow the same shape. Chapter 20. What the Water Keeps. The sound is still there. Same water, same quiet drift, same low clouds that never quite lift. If you stood on that shoreline today, you wouldn't see anything unusual. No debris, no marks. No sign that anything ever fell from the sky. Just a calm stretch of water, doing what it has always done. Keeping things. That's the nature of water, isn't it? It doesn't argue, it doesn't explain, it just holds. Over time, details sink, edges soften. What was once sharp becomes difficult to trace. Not gone, just out of reach. And maybe that's why this story lingers, because it never resolves cleanly. You're left with fragments. A man who saw something he couldn't explain. Another man who listened a little too carefully. A visitor who already knew. Two officers who never made it back. And a version of events that don't quite replace the original. Now, you can land wherever you like with it. Hoax, misinterpretation, something real, something misunderstood. There's room for all of it. But here's the part that tends to stay with people. That quiet question from earlier. The one that never really goes away. If someone knew about that morning before it was ever reported, how? And maybe more importantly, what else do we assume begins with us that actually doesn't? You don't have to answer that. In fact, it's probably better if you don't. Some stories don't need conclusions. They just need space. Space to sit, space to drift, to exist without being forced into something neat and finished. Because not everything that happens is meant to be fully understood. Some things are just kept. And now we drift, just like everything else.